Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Now today, we are talking about Mythwind. What do you need to know about Mythwind? 5 things that I'm going to talk about that I think are important for you to know about it, and then whether or not you should back it and is it right for you. I'm going to give this all in one video, so hopefully this is helpful as this campaign winds down. So, without further ado, let's do this. Mythwind, right? Right. Mythwind, another in the realm of the biggest craze lately that we have seen, especially on the crowdfunding side of things, as this open world, persistent environment in terms of a tabletop game setting. More in the video game ilk, converted now to the tabletop. We've seen it with Soul Raiders. We've seen it with Lands of Galzyr. We've seen it with Artisans of Splendent Vale. We saw it with Arydia. And now we have Mythwind. So 5 within less months than that span. So, what do you need to know about Mythwind? First off, like I said, this is an open world. And that is probably the biggest point I will emphasize to you right now, pure and simple. There is no end game. There is no ultimate climax. There is no, I am going to overcome. And how do you feel about that? You can just play on. You can just drop in, drop out. Does that appeal to you as a gamer? Because in a sense, it's a different type of campaign. You may not look at this as a campaign game, necessarily as a truest sense of the word. But it is a campaign game. It's just a different type of it where there is more cooperation in peacefulness rather than cooperation in overcoming via violence. This is more Stardew Valley than Gears of War, if you will. Your actions have consequences, but your actions have further actions as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Whether it is on your own board or on the common town board. There is no predetermined, preset path. And for blessing or curse, that sort of is what sets it apart, even within those other 4 games that I talked about, in how it accomplishes that. Because, to be very frank, it does do that very distinctly in how you are drawing the weather cards and then possibly the event cards and going through the town phase and the actions of the town and then your own personal and then the dusk, twilight, cleanup side of things. So what I'm saying is point 1 is blurring right in with point 2 in the mechanics of how it compares. The closest of these games that I have seen to this is Lands of Galzyr, in the sense that you have these cards that you are flipping and you are drawing and you are utilizing in order to play it. And like Lands of Galzyr, where you have your own unique animal creature story behind it, I mean, you have your own unique journal entry paths that are more, I would argue, more asymmetric in this game than any of those other games that I mentioned. Perhaps maybe Arydia, but Arydia has much more action combat, where this has none. This is development, build, resource management at the purest form. This is more Euro game than Amerithrash. And that may be the biggest important difference in terms of how it incorporates the narrative than many of those other games, where it is not action selection economy. Because these most definitely are exactly just that. And so if you are looking for an open world Amerithrash game, this is not your game, folks. One of those others is going to be much more suited to your needs. But if you are more Euro game and you want something that is multiplayer solitaire but with a cooperative version of a Euro game, this is much heavier your type of game from that side of things. Whether it's the farmer, who is more tile placement, action selection, or the crafter who is literally exchanging resources to craft and to build and to buy and to sell. And then how they play on their own unique player boards here, because let's be clear, they are unique. They are completely different in terms of that. Here you are collecting those resources, action selections, upgrades here. Whereas with the farmer, you have your upgrades, but you have your dice that you're going to be placing as well, but you have this land that you have to clear as an either or, depending on whether or not you want to have more land to harvest from, or if you want to harvest your plants in order to get more gold from them in the first place. And you're tile laying sort of a la My City-ish in that regard. That leads me directly into point number 3. That this game has the asymmetry, as I just mentioned, with those characters, right? You're going to be having a plethora of selections. But my biggest concern in a game like this is because they are so asymmetric, something like Vast, if you will, where they are just vastly asymmetric, is that they're almost too asymmetric. Because when I play a deck builder, right, everyone wants to play a deck builder. Everyone wants to get the deck building experience. And this game is not going to give you an equal experience with those asymmetries. And that is the blessing and curse that goes along with them. I mean, you can say with a game like Root, for example, to use that one as a great example, they are all achieving through the same type of system. This game is taking each and every character as a different self-contained biosphere system. And if you're like me, for example, and if you don't like resource management, action selection, more very typical Euro, and I want to be more of the tile placement, and someone else is the tile placement that game, I may not have a very good time. Which means YMMV, your mileage may vary not just on the game, but the aspect of the game in which you are playing, where you may have a very high because you get the one that is suited to you, but the next time you are forced to play a different one which isn't quite to your ilk. Which is why I would argue, as weird as this seems much more like a solo 2-player game. So you would have your picking of the variety from that side of things, so as not to get pigeonholed into said role that is not of interest or your ilk in the first place. And so if you have people that are very, very narrow in their interests, as I mentioned just a minute ago about the Euro side of things, or if you have people that are very much Amerithrash on the other side of things, having to have some of those people go halvesies on what they want may not be the most appealing to them. So you need to be aware of it from your group side of things. I think that is probably one of the more important aspects. Again, another blessing, curse, weird thing is this action selection common town board. I like it, and also it's just very different. Because there are some events that they will cause you to trigger everyone doing something, or forcing essentially one person to do a certain action while the others are able to free reign whatever they want to do. And again, that is the cooperative side of things, where one may sacrifice to boon others. A la the pandemic system in the first place, right? I'm going to do this action on my turn so that the next turn you guys can all have significant increase in what you can do. And as an asymmetric, how do you feel about that? You know, because that's really what it's asking you to do. The dice are also a very interesting aspect of this, hiring the workers, and having to potentially pay for them to keep them repeatedly. Again, just as something that it is using different. Now, differently than obviously many of the other games, because I mean, Galzyr is a dice chucker in the first place. Soul Raiders and Arydia are heavy on the action. Artisans is very, very, very heavy on the narrative with the action then as well. So this, of the 5 of them, is distinctly different. And I would argue that if you have one of those other 4, or when I say that, I mean, if you have backed one of those other 4 at this point, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. So you should not have to fear that side of things. More, the fear is the group dynamic that I mentioned, as well as it is essentially a campaign game, because this is not going to be a game that is going to be well off for one-offs, if you know what I mean. If you are like me and you like to play one-offs after one-offs after one-offs, or two-offs and two-offs, and, you know, play it once or twice and then come back to it a month or 2 later, this is not going to be a game as well for you. You should, you know, probably pass on this, because this is going to be most rewarded from repeated plays, just like all of these games will be. And so that is no different than all of those other ones I mentioned at the same respect. The last point, the point that I like, because I did not see it as much in Lands of Galzyr, to use that as the main comparison right now, is the upgrade system. And now the problem is this prototype doesn't have much of the upgrade system. And so that is one dynamic that, as a non-Euro side of things, essentially, potentially, it may be offering to spice things up as well. And so that is going to be the big question of how well that is done and how well it is incorporated into each of those various boards in the first place. So something to be aware of from that side of things as well. So let's take a look at the page and let's go through my thoughts on the campaign itself, and more importantly at the end here, should you be backing it. So here we are at the page. The biggest thing right away at the beginning, we'll get it right out of the way. Okay, all those things that I just mentioned. Price point is the big one, and we're going to go straight to that. $85 for the core. Relatively comparable to the other ones that I mentioned, not distinctly different. The expansion here is going to cost you $32 more. So, is it worth it? And then you have the magical miniatures and the all-in, which gets you journal, metal coins, art book, neoprene mat, and everything else. I talked about all of these points. And to be honest with you, again, the best value is probably going to be this core box with the expanded horizons. I would argue that this core pledge with the expanded horizons is your best value. It's the best value. If you're on the fence of what one to get, you're getting that one. I mean, you can get all of this other stuff. You can get the magical miniatures. You can get the extra superfluous stuff. But that stuff is very hit or miss on the secondary market sometimes. Very hit or miss. And especially miniatures, in a game like this, I could see it losing a little bit of value. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're beautiful miniatures. I have a copy that came with this prototype that are painted, and they're absolutely splentastic. But that's also the stuff that, you know, as they say in the FAQ, will it go to retail? I don't know. And sometimes expansions and the superfluous stuff is the stuff that may not be at retail. So if anything, I would not be just getting the core pledge. That is my basic recommendation usually in these situations. But if whatever you do in this situation, if you were getting this, I say you have to go at one of the higher levels. Not necessarily on the campaign, but at least during the pledge. Apart from that, I mean, there's not a whole lot. If you were one of the early backers, you get the extra add-on. And you know what? If you're not one of them, it's probably, again, worth getting. Now, the interesting thing is you don't see any exclusives here in terms of stretch goals, but this is the Winds of Magic. And this is a whole expansion for free. So that's more of the exclusive side of things, that you're going to get it for cheaper than if you were to get all of it at retail, if it all comes to retail. So that's what you need to know. Again, that's what you need to be getting. Here is the upgrade system that I was talking about, which has the very good potential at making this game a lot more interesting. But again, is going to need to have many repeated plays over and over again to take full advantage of it. And how many other campaign games do you have? The rule book, from the rule book to the journals, to the rule book to the journals, until you get sort of through the tutorial, which again, there's still a lot of referencing in terms of, one, all of this iconography, which you can't see, but it's massive. There's a lot of it. And it's not complicated, but it's a big learning curve. Nothing to worry about during the campaign, but it's something that as we talk about these games, it's the difference between what makes a game really good and wow, right? That's what Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion did, right? compared to Gloomhaven, why people so loved it at the retail level, is because you could literally just open it up and read and understand every single thing, as complex of a whole system as it is when taken all at once. And that's what this needs a touch of from that side of things. And that's one of the other biggest, things I will say. And so, I hope they do that. That's about it. Otherwise, you just need to watch some of the other gameplay at this point to know whether or not it's for you. Now, again, is this extra deluxeification stuff worth it for you? That's the other thing that you have to ask when you're looking at what other high level of pledge you want to go for. So that's it. That's Mythwind. My thoughts, my impressions, my whether or not this is right for you. Now, I'll be frank with you. Having played it, this has been a great use of a play type. And so I want to thank Brendan for sending it my way. And actually, Alex from Board Game Co., I got the one that he had. Because as much as I like this idea and this concept, I am definitely more of an Amerithrash action attack style of things. And so I know that this one is not for me. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just definitely more on the Euro side of things. And if you guys know anything about me on my channel, if you're watching this for the first time, I am not that realm of things. I mean, look at the stuff behind me. That is not that type of stuff. And that's okay. Because what's most important with all of these games is not, oh, okay, you've got to get this. Oh, FOMO, this is an amazing game. You need to buy stuff that's right for you. And I would argue that designers, in the same sense, want that as well. Now, again, there's some that, there is some FOMO driving things and they don't really necessarily care. This is not, I'm not saying that this is this at all. And so there are enough people out there that like I said, that are going to have that Venn diagram between Euro, open world, cooperative, thinky, multi-use actions, that are going to like this game. Very solid. The basement of this game is pretty high. But now, having had a hands-on copy, that has been the most useful thing for me, is I know this isn't for me. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not having something on my shelf that I'm not going to play. And that's the bottom line. No matter how beautiful it is, no matter what level of excellence of game it is, if it's not for me, it's not for me. There you go. Thoughts, questions, concerns? As always, shoot me a comment below. I try to respond to every single one. If you liked it, let me know. As always, if you want to subscribe, that'll help me even more so I can get more of this stuff for you out in the future. As always, though, thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'll see you around. Can't make this stuff up, folks. Can't make it up.